We'd like to know if there's any factual basis for the investigation originally, or they've developed one. That investigation is highly suspect. Has there ever been an investigation of this magnitude with such obvious indications of extreme, disgusting bias, which totally corrupts the process?
That was President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, giving us a preview of his legal team's new strategy for handling the Mueller investigation, at least publicly. Those comments came after the New York Times reported the president's lawyers are telling Mueller's team that they need to prove they have evidence that the president committed a crime before he will agree to sit down for an interview. Joining me now, member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. Congressman, it's good to see you. Let's start with what Rudy Giuliani has been saying this morning across these Sunday shows. He is essentially alleging corruption and bias in the people around Robert Mueller, although he would not go so far as to tell my colleague Chuck Todd that Mueller himself is corrupt. What is your assessment of what these FBI officials did? Peter Strzok, who is set to testify this week, not in front of one of your committees, but up on Capitol Hill, who has sent these text messages indicating that he was had negative feelings towards the president, and that has led to this claim of bias.
Yeah, well, look, the FBI, the CIA, the intel community, the Justice Department, people who work there don't live in a vacuum. They have their own personal views, and they're entitled to them. But there's no indication that any of this, their personal views, whether it be the Clinton investigation or the Trump investigation or any other before it, had their views impact how they did their jobs. But Rudy is just fishing. Obviously, what he's talking about here, some new legal theory, and I practiced criminal law 10 years. I can't imagine this one, that the Justice Department has to prove criminal violations of the law before the president is allowed to be subpoenaed. He could be subpoenaed at any moment. The Supreme Court has ruled on several occasions in two pretty landmark cases involving Nixon and Clinton that the president is not above the law, and they have to respond to, in one case, legally bound subpoenas. So, look, it's the same legal team that said that he could virtually use pardons to stop a criminal investigation, that they could decide which investigations go forward, those of their friends, and which ones they don't, against their enemies, that the Justice Department has to give them information, discovery, before a trial date. This is all total fabrications of a legal team, I think, that's a little freaked out by concerns among many about Mr. Cohen flipping.
I want to ask you as well about Devin Nunes, the Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee. He has been sending letters to Congressman Gowdy and Goodlatte on the Judiciary Committee, asking them to interview a long list of people about the Trump dossier. Were Democrats on the Intelligence Committee aware that those requests were going to be made, and what's he up to?
We haven't had notification from the chairman, Mr. Nunes, about anything he's going to do for months now. He has undertaken rogue investigations. He's worked with the White House to prepare his own memo. He began the investigation with a midnight ride to the White House, in which was very clear that he was getting information, then turning it back to the White House to show some other conspiracy. He also stopped subpoenas on documents and people of critical interest. He's basically worked hand in glove with the White House to thwart the investigation. So what he's doing now, which is unilateral, rogue, against the rules of the committee and the House, is absolutely nothing new.
Congressman, do you or other Democrats on your committee have any questions about how the FBI has conducted itself? Or if you take back the House, will you shut down all of these lines of inquiry?
Look, we're the Oversight Committee. We should be always looking at how the intel community operates. But what we've seen so far is desperate attempts by the Republicans in the House trying to protect the president politically and legally. Nothing, and all the wild allegations they've made for over a year and a half now, has been found to be true. So we can only expect this to continue. As again, I think this investigation.
So would you urge Democrats to shut down these lines of inquiry if they take back control of the committee?
Look, if there's a reasonable line of inquiry, we'll follow up on it. what's more important than all that is the fact that the most important investigation of our lifetime, I would say more important than Watergate, especially to our democratic process, was shut down unilaterally by the Republicans on this committee. That would reopen.
I want to show you something that the president had to say about his upcoming meeting with Vladimir Putin, and then get your take. Let's take a look.
I'm meeting with President Putin next week, and getting along, let me tell you, getting along with Russia and getting along with China and getting along with other countries is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. They're going, will President Trump be prepared? You know, President Putin is KGB and this and that. You know what? Putin's fine. He's fine. We're all fine. We're people. Will I be prepared? Totally prepared. I've been preparing for this stuff my whole life. They don't say that. They don't say that.
Congressman, do you agree that Putin is fine?
Yeah, he's just a ball of fun. He's a very dangerous man. He isn't a KGB person. He was KGB. He kills journalists. He is engaged in a war with one of our allies in Ukraine. He annexed Crimea. And our president, who is not prepared for this, has opened up the possibility of recognizing the annexation of Crimea and bringing Russia back into the would be the G8. So he's talking about attacking our allies and going along with one of our great adversaries. It's okay to talk with him. It's important to engage. But what he's doing now is turning over the world order, the liberal democratic world order that began right after the Second World War. That world order is under attack by its primary architect, the United States of America, and at the same time embracing President Putin, refusing to acknowledge what the Russians did to the democratic process, which the entire intel community agrees to, and a bipartisan Senate committee agrees to. So he believes Putin more than his own intel community and our allies.
Congressman Mike Quigley, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sure.
Ruth Marcus, I want to pick back up on, we were talking a little bit about the House Intelligence Committee, the inquiries from Devin Nunes. If Democrats do get a chance to go back to running these committees, how does that sort of unwind? I mean, it seems to me they would shut down most of the Nunes inquiries, most likely, but there's potentially quite a few threads for them to pick up going forward.
Yes, and we just had this very interesting, very compelling, very telling report from the Senate Intelligence Committee, but there are additional things to look at, and I think, for me, taking back the House is would be significant if it happened, not just for the Russia inquiry, but for all of the other. I would be much more worried if I were the White House and Republicans about all of the other strands of inquiry that could go on. Imagine what an actual functioning House that was going to be willing to engage in oversight could have done with the late lamented Scott Pruitt.
I was just going to say, there was some reporting in the New York Times today, Mark Lauder, quickly before we go, that essentially officials in the White House said, yeah, there's no way we would be prepared to fight against those kinds of investigations.
Let's remember when the Democrats took control during President George W. Bush's presidency, they established a war room just to deal with the endless string of inquiries and subpoenas and investigations that were coming then. And
do you think your former colleagues are ready for it?
It would multiply 100 times over now in these circumstances. I don't think they have to be prepared for it today. I think as we get closer to that time, which I don't think will happen, but they will. There's time to prepare.
All right. Ruth Marcus, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate all of your insights.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.